We can now bring in Samuel Ramani, Associate Fellow at the Royal United Services Institute. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us on France 24 tonight. IDF forces are now inside the Al-Shifa hospital compound where we have the displaced, we have doctors, we have patients still inside the compound. How on earth can they keep civilians safe?
Well, I mean, that's obviously a difficult question, right? Because it seems that the Shifa hospital's operations have also shut down, which is endangering patients, and military operations will inevitably endanger healthcare personnel.
We also have internet and telephone services which have been disrupted over in Gaza. There seems to be this communications blackout. How are residents, the displaced, supposed to know where to go, what to do?
Well, this is a very big problem, right? Because it makes the messages largely dependent now on the distribution of Israeli leaflets, which are being distributed to Khan Yunis. And the problem is, as we saw in the evacuation of northern Gaza, the Hamas authorities can be giving the exact opposite warning. Hamas authorities, for example, urged residents in northern Gaza to stay in place and fight for their land. So, without telecommunications and without access to information to the outside world, they may stay there for longer than necessary and find themselves in harm's way.
Yeah, but we also did see hundreds of thousands of people flee on foot, even 90-year-old women walking when they could barely walk to get out of northern Gaza. And then we have now people who are in Khan Yunis, which is in the southern part of the enclave, who are receiving leaflets to move. Where on earth are they supposed to go?
Well, I mean, I think that the situation in northern Gaza, yes, many people did leave. Right, 700,000 left very early on, according to the Israelis, but some did stay, and that's led to some civilian casualties. With regards to the southern Gaza situation, that gets very complicated, and I think that the onus starts becoming on Egypt, right, to open up the Rafah crossing.
But why would Egypt open up the Rafah crossing? Because they said they've made it quite clear that they wouldn't.
Well, that's what I'm trying to say. The Egyptians would not are saying that they wouldn't do it, but that's provoking a lot of anger inside the United States because the U.S. is providing substantial amounts of military aid to Egypt, and the expectation would be that Egypt is a good partner, would open it up and follow suit, but they don't want to do that because they're concerned also about security risks associated with potential Hamas militants coming in with civilians into the Sinai Peninsula or the rest of Egypt.
In the package we played before coming to you, you heard there from the UN Human Rights Commissioner talking about the rise of communicable diseases, what have you, based on the situation of what's going on in Gaza. Plus, you have this internet blockades. We also have Israeli forces in a hospital compound. At what point are we going to call these war crimes?
Well, I mean, I think it depends on how you really define it. Obviously, right? There needs to be an independent investigation. I mean, I know the International Criminal Court is taking it seriously, even though Israel is not a party to it. We see many countries in the global south already use the word war crimes. So we've already seen some countries in Europe, like Ireland.
I'm just saying, if we look back last year when Russia was hitting Ukraine's critical energy infrastructure before the onset of winter, I recall that we did have leaders, global leaders, who did talk about alleged Russian war crimes. Are these not war crimes?
Well, I mean, we saw the same thing happen, for example, when the United States struck electrical infrastructure in Yugoslavia, right? Many people didn't say it then. Many people said it when the Russians struck it, and many people are not saying it now with regards to Israel. And with regards to this, I mean, I don't want to make a conclusive determination on air because I'm not an international lawyer. But there are many people who would say that it would be.
Let's talk about, as Israeli Defense Forces now go from the north towards the south, what challenges will they have in differentiating civilians from Hamas?
Well, I mean, obviously that becomes a lot more of a difficult and challenging thing to have happen, particularly because Hamas militants are going to be embedded alongside civilians in many areas. And as the population gets denser, the Hamas are much more likely to rely even more on apartment buildings and other civilian areas to carry out military operations. And I think that if the civilian casualties continue to escalate, Israel will be under more pressure. Also, if the Al-Shifa tunnels happen to have guns and rifles, but no evidence of a command center, Israel will be under even more pressure then to distinguish, and if they don't, more pressure for a ceasefire.
Israel just says up until now that they found a tunnel shaft. We also don't know what this command center is, what it looks like, and we have reports tonight of a hostage who has apparently been killed near the premises. Of course, Hamas saying she died in an Israeli airstrike. Israel saying she was murdered.
Yeah, well, definitely. I mean, there's a lot of controversy now about the fact that the hostages have also been located maybe inside the hospital. That's what the Israelis are saying. And now one has possibly died. Hamas, from the very beginning, has insisted that Israel's ground operations and air operations will lead to the death of hostages or have already led to the deaths of dozens. And this death might point to the fact that Israeli operations have done it or the person has died. We don't really know exactly why or how, but it's something to pay attention to.
But Samuel, just very briefly, I mean, the thing is, this is a war situation, of course, and there's going to be a lot of he said, she said. So how does one know what to believe with that, with the limited access Israel is allowing for journalists in Gaza?
Well, I mean, this creates a very difficult situation. I mean, there's been some evidence that the Gaza Ministry of Health statistics in terms of casualties are reasonably accurate because the United Nations reports them similarly, and there's also lists of names and people. That, for example, can be considered a source. But inevitably, there's a lot of situations where many media outlets have to go into facilities like Shifa with the Israeli military, and therefore they get the Israeli perspective. And then you also see other outlets like Al Jazeera, and as well as the Russian media outlets that work in the Arab world, promoting almost exclusively pro-Palestinian perspective. So it's very hard to get objective information, and the telecommunications problem makes it doubly hard.
Samuel, thank you very much for that. Samuel Ramani joining us there.